The night before the wedding, one brother vanished. The other was found drenched in blood, whispering, "He was mine before she ever was." What happened inside that house would shake the entire town and leave a trail of betrayal, obsession, and an unthinkable secret. From the outside, the Carter twins appeared to be the picture of a perfect sibling bond, inseparable since birth, always side by side in every photo, speaking in a rhythm only they seemed to understand. Ryan and Dylan shared everything: birthdays, schools, bedrooms, secrets. But no one truly knew the depth of their connection. And perhaps that was the most terrifying part. Growing up in a small, conservative town, the Carter brothers learned early that some emotions had to be hidden. As children, they would spend hours locked in their room, whispering stories, building imaginary worlds where only they existed. Their parents saw them as unusually close, twin things, they called it. But over time, that closeness morphed into something darker, something unspoken. Neither of them dared give it a name. By high school, cracks were already forming beneath their perfect twin facade. Ryan had begun dating, experimenting with girls, laughing about it afterward with Dylan. But Dylan never dated anyone, never showed interest. He watched Ryan from the sidelines, smiling tightly as his brother's life began to branch away from their shared world. When Ryan kissed his first girlfriend, Dylan smashed a glass in the kitchen that night and claimed it was an accident. Their parents thought it was nothing, but Ryan looked at his brother differently after that. What no one saw, what no one could have imagined, was the hidden life they led behind closed doors. A twisted dependence had taken root between them. The emotional bond had long crossed a line into something else. It started subtly: lingering touches, nights spent talking under covers, quiet confessions in the dark. Dylan clung to Ryan like he was oxygen, like he couldn't exist without him. And Ryan didn't stop it. He let the intimacy happen. Whether out of guilt, confusion, or a need for connection, he never pushed his brother away. But over the years, things changed. Ryan went off to college, met new people, and tried to build a life of his own. Dylan stayed behind, taking odd jobs, growing more isolated. His world never expanded past the orbit of his brother. And when Ryan returned home 2 years later, engaged to a woman named Emily, everything inside Dylan began to shatter. He tried to be supportive. He smiled in photos, helped with wedding planning, even stood by Ryan's side during tuxedo fittings. But underneath that surface was a storm of betrayal and grief. Dylan believed that Ryan was his, and always would be. He didn't understand how someone else could just come in and take that away. He began watching Emily closely, following her, reading her texts over Ryan's shoulder. He once asked Ryan, late at night, "Do you love her more than me?" Ryan had laughed it off, but Dylan wasn't joking. By then, Dylan's mental state had begun to fray. He kept a journal, pages filled with scribbled thoughts that made little sense to anyone but him. One entry read, "He's forgetting. I have to remind him who we are, who we've always been." Another, "She doesn't know what he sounds like when he's asleep. She doesn't know what his heart feels like against mine." Ryan noticed the change. He started avoiding Dylan, spending more nights at Emily's place. He stopped replying to late-night messages, brushing off calls. Dylan, in response, became more erratic. He once showed up at Ryan's apartment uninvited, crying, begging him not to go through with the wedding. When Ryan told him to leave, Dylan punched the wall so hard he fractured 2 fingers. Still, Ryan didn't tell anyone. How could he? How do you explain something you've spent your whole life hiding? He figured his brother was just struggling with the transition, that he'd move on eventually. But he didn't understand just how deep the obsession ran. 1 week before the wedding, Dylan gave Ryan a box of old photos from their childhood. In the very last one, taped to the inside of the lid, was a Polaroid Ryan didn't recognize. One of them asleep in bed together, shirtless, limbs tangled. Ryan's face had been circled in red marker. No note, just that photo. That was the first time Ryan truly felt afraid. He tried to create distance, but Dylan wouldn't let go. The night before the wedding, Ryan agreed to meet him one last time, to clear the air, to try and bring some kind of peace between them. What happened after that would remain a mystery for days. But neighbors reported hearing shouting, followed by complete silence. When police arrived the next morning, responding to a missing persons report filed by Emily, they found Dylan in the living room, barefoot, bloody, and still wearing the bracelet Ryan had given him when they were 13. Ryan's body was found upstairs, face down in a pool of blood. There were no signs of forced entry, no weapons lying around, just the silence of a house that had been a sanctuary once, but now reeked of obsession and death. And beneath the bed, tucked in a worn shoebox, was a final journal entry from Dylan. One line, repeated over and over in shaky handwriting. If I can't have him, no one can. The night before the wedding was supposed to be quiet, peaceful, just one final evening before everything changed. Ryan had spent the morning finalizing his vows, checking in on the venue, and trying, unsuccessfully, to reach Dylan. He hadn't responded to texts all day, not unusual lately, but enough to unsettle Ryan. There was a heaviness in the air, one he couldn't name. He told Emily he needed to stop by the old house, just to talk to his brother one last time. Ryan arrived around 7:30 p.m. The sun had just begun to sink, painting the suburban sky in hues of violet and ash. The Carter family home was dimly lit, blinds drawn, and strangely quiet. When Ryan knocked, the door creaked open without resistance. Dylan was already inside, sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing that same threadbare hoodie he never seemed to wash. A candle flickered between them, casting shadows on his face that made him look older, more hollow. Ryan sat down cautiously. He wanted this to go smoothly. There was no script, just the hope that maybe, somehow, they could end things on a note that didn't taste like poison. I'm getting married tomorrow, Ryan began, gently, testing the air. Dylan didn't speak. His eyes were fixed on the candle's flame, watching it tremble. A full 30 seconds passed before he whispered, I know. Silence again. Ryan tried to ease into it. He mentioned memories, their childhood games, nights spent talking about the stars, the promises they'd made when they were kids. Dylan smiled once, a crooked, distant smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. You don't love her, Dylan said suddenly, without looking up. Ryan sighed. That's not fair. She doesn't know you. Dylan continued, voice low, trembling. Not like I do. You're making a mistake. We belong to each other. There it was, finally spoken out loud. Ryan felt the words hit him like ice water. He stood up, trying to keep calm, but his voice shook. This has to stop, Dylan. Whatever we had, whatever you think we had, it's over. It's not right. I love her. I'm building a future, and you're not part of it like that. Dylan flinched. He looked up, and in that moment, his face changed. Something broke. The calm dissolved, and what replaced it was fury, sharp, animal, wild. You used me, he spat. You lied every time you said you loved me. You let me believe we were forever. Ryan backed away, suddenly aware of how small the room felt. He reached for his phone, but Dylan was already moving, fast. The candle fell. Something shattered. A thud. The kitchen, once filled with unsaid things, now echoed with the sound of a scuffle, of breathless struggling, of things finally spiraling out of control. What happened next wasn't clean. It wasn't cinematic. It was raw, clumsy, desperate. Ryan tried to leave, but Dylan blocked the way. He screamed something unintelligible, tears running down his face. He grabbed a photo off the wall, a picture of them at age 10, arms around each other, and hurled it at the ground, glass exploding. In a blind moment of rage, Dylan lunged. Ryan shoved him back, yelled for him to stop, but Dylan wasn't listening. He was sobbing now, chest heaving. I gave up everything for you, he said, voice breaking. I never wanted anyone else. I waited for you. There was a brief silence before Ryan whispered, that wasn't love, Dylan. It was control. That's when it happened. Fast, silent, sudden. The object, a heavy glass paperweight from the hallway shelf, was in Dylan's hand before he even realized it. Or maybe he had planned it. Maybe he'd thought about this moment so many times that the action was automatic. He brought it down once, twice, 3 times. The house went still. By the time Dylan processed what he had done, it was too late. Blood pooled quickly beneath Ryan's head. His body twitched once, then fell still. Dylan dropped the paperweight. It hit the floor with a sickening clink. For the next hour, he didn't move. He sat beside Ryan's body, knees pulled to his chest, rocking slightly, whispering, he was mine. He promised. He didn't try to flee. When police arrived the next morning, after Emily's frantic call about Ryan never coming home, they found Dylan barefoot in the living room, staring at nothing. He was covered in blood. His hands, his clothes, even the side of his face bore the sticky reminder of what he'd done. He didn't resist arrest. As they cuffed him, he asked a single question. Can I still go to the wedding? Officers exchanged confused glances, assuming it was shock. But Dylan was perfectly lucid. In his mind, he was still part of the ceremony, still bound to his brother. The murder weapon was recovered without issue. So was the broken picture frame. Forensics would later show fingerprints belonging only to the twins. No signs of forced entry. No struggle beyond the initial burst of violence. Just two brothers. One dead, one broken, and the chilling finality of a love that should never have been. The courtroom was packed. Media vans lined the streets outside. Reporters clutched notepads. Cameras clicked every few seconds. And people who had never even known the Carter family sat shoulder to shoulder just to witness the unthinkable play out. The story had spread like wildfire. Twin brothers in a secret relationship. One murdered the other on the eve of his wedding. It was the kind of headline that stirred morbid curiosity and judgment in equal measure. But inside the courtroom, there was no sensational music or commercial breaks. Only silence, grief, and the slow unraveling of everything that had been hidden for so long. Dylan Carter sat alone at the defense table, thinner than ever, pale, wearing a gray suit that hung awkwardly on his frame. His eyes didn't roam the room. They stayed fixed on a single point on the floor, as if he were watching something only he could see, something that wouldn't go away. The prosecution laid out the case with brutal clarity. Dylan Carter, consumed by jealousy, murdered his twin brother in cold blood the night before Ryan was to be married. The motive, they said, was obsessive love, a fixation so consuming that Dylan believed Ryan belonged solely to him and no one else. They showed the photographs, blood-spattered floors, the shattered picture frame, Ryan's lifeless body face down at the top of the stairs. The jury flinched. Some audibly gasped, but Dylan didn't react. Then came the journal entries. Prosecutors read directly from Dylan's handwritten notes. He is slipping away. But if I kill the part of him that doesn't love me, maybe I can keep what's left. And again, in another entry, I'd rather destroy him than give him to her. These pages were the darkest corner of Dylan's mind laid bare, and they left no room for misunderstanding. The defense took a different approach. They didn't deny the act. Dylan had confessed. There was no need to debate guilt. Instead, they focused on why it happened. A series of psychiatrists were brought in to testify. They painted a portrait of a troubled young man, raised in isolation, emotionally fused with his twin from an early age. The psychologist who evaluated Dylan said he had experienced pathological enmeshment, an identity so entangled with his brother that the idea of separation triggered something primal, something violent. The clinical diagnosis included dependent personality disorder, dissociative episodes, and chronic trauma rooted in a relationship that blurred every line. The defense argued diminished capacity, that Dylan hadn't been mentally fit in the moment of the crime, that he had lost touch with reality, driven by fear of abandonment and a delusional sense of betrayal. But that didn't change the fact that someone was dead, and that someone was beloved. Emily took the stand. Her voice trembled as she described the weeks leading up to the wedding, how Ryan had grown distant, secretive, how he'd told her, only once, in a whisper, that Dylan wasn't doing well. But he never explained what that meant. She'd assumed it was stress, maybe wedding nerves. She never imagined what lay beneath. She broke down when they showed the last photo Ryan had taken, just hours before his death. It was of their wedding rings, placed side by side on the table, sunlight catching the metal. The caption, never posted, had been saved in his drafts. Tomorrow, I marry my best friend. The irony hung heavy in the room. One of the most haunting testimonies came from a neighbor who'd grown up alongside the Carter twins. He recalled the boys as quiet, always in their own world, always whispering, always clinging to each other in a way that, looking back, seemed less like sibling affection and more like something else entirely. He said once, years ago, he'd overheard them fighting. Dylan had shouted, "You're mine. You said we'd never need anyone else." At the time, he'd chalked it up to a typical sibling spat. Now, it felt like a warning no one had understood. After 3 grueling weeks, the trial came to a close. The jury deliberated for only 5 hours. Guilty of second-degree murder. Not premeditated, they decided, but driven by emotion so intense and unstable it crossed the line into lethal rage. Dylan was sentenced to 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole. He didn't cry when the verdict was read. He nodded once, as if he expected it. As if, In his mind, the punishment meant nothing compared to the loss he'd already inflicted on himself. After the sentencing, he was allowed to make a statement. He stood, hands trembling slightly, and looked out into the silent courtroom. "I wasn't trying to kill him," he said softly. "I was trying to stop him from leaving. I thought if I could just remind him who we were, everything would go back to how it used to be. No apology, no remorse, just a broken man trapped in a memory that no longer existed." Ryan was buried 3 days after the trial ended. Emily never wore her wedding dress. Instead, she placed it in a box, sealed it, and left it in the attic, never to be opened again. The Carter family home was sold to a new couple from out of town. They never learned the full story, only that something terrible had happened there. The room where Ryan died was turned into a nursery. The bloodstains had been scrubbed away, but sometimes, on quiet nights, the couple would swear they heard footsteps on the stairs. Pausing, waiting. The past, it seemed, refused to be buried.